Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the same 24 hours. I'm your host, Meredith Atwood. Very excited to talk about some interesting things, especially girls today with Marisa Porges. Hi, Marisa. How are you doing?
Hey, Meredith, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes, absolutely. So, one of the things I love about the work you do is trying to impart your wisdom, your research, years of experience on how we can raise better young women or make it easier for women to be young women to be more resilient, to grow up, to make these teen years less difficult. And I know we just talked offline. I've got a 12-year-old, and how the pandemic, her avoiding school this year, I thought, hey, it's not that bad to miss a year of middle school. And we kind of laughed about it. But what is it that we know now that, say, our parents didn't know about raising teen girls?
Yeah, well, and I think first, on one hand, education and research has come so far in terms of what young women are going through, particularly in this early teen years. And yeah, we were joking about it earlier, right? It was tough. It wasn't easy. On the other hand, I think all of us, who've been through it and now have been also seen what professional life is really like and what personal life is really like as adults, can also say there are still systemic challenges that women are facing in any workplace, in any part of the country, in any part of the world that they're not changing that much. They're still there. Yes, we've made great gains, but there's still things that our girls need to be prepared to face when they're older. And so my job here at Baldwin, the school that I run, but also in the book that I wrote, which is a combination of my stories personally from facing those struggles and challenges and what I see working with our girls today, is how we prepare the next generation, our daughters, our granddaughters, any young woman in our life, to meet those challenges head on, to be able to not just earn a seat at the table, but raise their voice effectively when they're there, to negotiate better, to embrace their natural talents for empathetic thinking and communicating in certain ways so that they really stand apart no matter where they head next. So I think it's
Yeah.
it's about that. It's about really being honest with ourselves about how we can give our girls the skills they need for the real world.
So how is that different? And I know it's different, but how is it different than the way like you and I were raised? Like, I feel
Yeah.
like I talked to Ada Calhoun on the podcast. She wrote the book Why We Can't Sleep. And one of her arguments was, our generation, we were told we could have it all. So like go have it all. Like the work that the feminists did ahead of us. We opened the store for you. So walk through it. Be
Right.
everything to everyone, and not, discounting, like that's a separate argument from privilege and
Hmm.
other sorts of issues, but widely, like, you have this opportunity, go be everything to everyone. So how are you balancing that with the reality of what we know that toll takes?
Yeah. Well, and I think part of it is we were given that message, and I heard that message too, right? It's why, I it led my career in life that way. And yet, along the way, I realized there are some things I wish I had been taught that would have really helped me, sort of go after it, right? The great example is I was never taught to negotiate, much less negotiate effectively. And studies show that still to this day, women are not, as a general matter, as effective as negotiators. There's a lot of social backlash at play. There's a lot of social
Right.
norms that play into it. But if we can just have a candid conversation about what does it take to negotiate, what does it take to be persuasive, what strategies work well for women that we can teach girls to start practicing at a young age so it comes naturally and easily for them when they're older, I think that's a huge part of it.
Sure.
I'll say the other part of it is also embracing some of the core strengths that do come naturally to many young women. Things like problem solving in teams, building consensus, empathetic, thinking and communication. These are things that, for social reasons, a lot of girls really embrace early on. But we've never really thought of it as an advantage, as something you want to lean into and be like, yeah, I am the most empathetic person in my school, in my team. And
Right.
yet that's what people hire for now, right? The future of leadership are people who empathize, who communicate well, who build consensus and navigate teams really effectively. Those are all things that, I see at our school come naturally to young girls. And if we can tell them, no, no, that's your superpower, that's your strength, then both, they'll be able to bridge the gap when they get out in the real world, and hopefully, yes, quote unquote, be able to do it all. We can talk about whether or not that's actually the goal we have in mind, but sort of feel like they have the skills they need to be effective when they're there.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good question. Like, is that the goal? Is the goal to have it all, or
Oh, I know,
that's
right?
like another podcast completely. Because I had it all, and I would also almost end up in rehab. You know what I mean? Like the moment I had it all was probably like the pinnacle of my unhappiness. Like there's the irony.
Well, and so it's one of those questions, and you're right. A separate podcast, although such an interesting one, is is it about having the opportunity to have it all, and then be able
Mm,
to realize that opportunity at different times? That's sort of the way I think about it and talk about it with my students. Right? I just want them to know that they can have any door open to them. They may choose to go through it at different times because you can't actually physically doing it all at once. But then they know, yeah, they can be an astronaut, be a politician, be a mom, like be a lawyer, like we were just talking about earlier, like all those things. It'll come at different times at their own pace, but no door will be closed to that thinking. So
right,
that's the way I think about it, at least. I don't
right.
know.
So how do you let's back up just a little bit on the
Totally.
like socioeconomic scale.
Hmm.
Like opportunities. That's such a big question, right? Because
Hmm.
not everyone is afforded the same opportunities, and we all aren't looking at the same doors to be opened. How do you address that in your work, and what have you seen, and how have some of the ways that you've worked with girls who have less opportunities, or just like maybe if you just want to speak on
Yeah.
that a little bit.
Well, I fundamentally think that, solving the system needs to happen in parallel with making sure our girls are prepared, right? And so
Mhm.
while the book and my current writing and work is about giving the girls the skills they need, or us as women, I think it's something I'm still working on, as a leader too. So throughout your
Sure.
life, making sure you have the skills. I think in parallel, we have to make sure we're changing the system. Um, what I would say is like what an individual can do, and what I'm hoping as part of the school we're doing as part of that is, realize really not just mentoring younger women, but sponsoring them. And I think there's a breakdown in what, they say studies show that men by and large have more sponsors than mentors. And for women, it's the other way. Like, yeah, we have lots of mentors, people who will give us advice, but not people who will pull us along and give us a leg up. And I think
Mhm.
trying to break that barrier down, particularly for women in your life who may not have had as many opportunities because of social economic reasons, because of race, geographic disparities, like whatever that might have been, educational disparities, and be able to say, I'm going to not just mentor you, but sponsor you and find ways to do that. I think that's a way that as we're trying to close the gap in the system and figure out systemic changes that will work, it is a way we can look out for each other, and in particular look out for those female members of our teams, our communities, our loved ones, our schools, who may have had less opportunities for a number of systemic or endemic reasons.
Yeah. Wow, that's such a great idea. Like, so what are there any organization this is the first time I've ever heard the idea of like sponsoring someone. Like, are
Yeah.
there any organizations out there that are like matching you with this, or is this like big brother, big sister? What is
Well,
the
so
sponsoring?
I actually think, I think there's a lot of organizations probably who do it formally, but I
Mhm.
actually think sponsorship is something we should be thinking about informally. Right. It's
Okay.
something that I learned like 2 jobs ago now. Right. So this is something that I saw in my own career happen where, sponsorship was just that person in your office who gave you the project, who found opportunities for you and, included you in the meeting if you weren't going to be included otherwise, who helped you help make sure that your ideas were being heard around the table. There are a lot of informal ways that we can sponsor one another and look out for fellow. And it's something that helps women look out for women in a really collegial, nice way. That it's something I saw at the White House when I worked there. We would literally quote informally, right? Like not a formal sponsorship, but if you were around the table and there's another woman saying an idea and she was getting stepped on verbally,
Right.
you would help sponsor her ideas by, hey, Meredith had a really great idea. Like, before a guy in the room steals it and says it, and then suddenly we all feel like we're being talked over, right? So I think that's the way I think about it, because it's so
Got it.
hard for us all to think of necessarily formal organizations, but there's so many informal opportunities to just provide concrete opportunities. Again, not advice, but literally, bring someone to a meeting
Opportunities.
who won't otherwise come to a meeting. Next time you're looking for someone, for me, it's who I bring to speak to our board of trustees, who I tee up to like give presentations. I'm always trying to look for people who might not otherwise naturally find that moment or have that moment. And I think it's a really nice way for us to think about sponsoring women in our life, women who need more opportunities, to get to your point of closing that gap.
Yeah, love it, love it. Okay, so your book, What girls need, how to raise bold, courageous, and resilient women. Okay. What do girls need? If you had
Oh
a
my
magic
goodness.
wand, what do girls need? Like, do we start with what do women need and move backwards? How did you come up with this idea?
Well, so that's exactly what I did. I mean, I literally thought about what I still need, and what I've, learned over time on the job training, so to speak. And then broke it down and say, well, how do we give those skills younger and younger so that it becomes a natural, natural muscle memory for young girls, so that when they are 20 something entering their first job, they know how to negotiate, they know how to speak up at a meeting, they know how to, compete for that new job, they know how to embrace their natural empathetic thinking and talents for adaptability and things like that, so that those become their superpowers. Essentially, again, I reflected on my own career and stuff I'm still working on now as an adult, as a leader, and saying, okay, well, what do we do at an earlier age? And yes, this is for boys and girls. So for anyone listening who has a boy in their life, sure, our boys need it too. But like, let's just be honest, they have advantages already. So I'm trying to make sure that our girls get them too. So again, I think it comes down to breaking down big words like resilience and boldness and courage into concrete skills that every day make those verbs reachable and actable, make those adjectives, excuse me. So that's how I think about it.
Okay. So I told you offline, I have a 12-year-old
Mhm.
daughter who loves CrossFit and loves to work out. And I've got a 13-year-old son who's into art. So I'm going to probably have like a gym owner and an artist. So I'll have someone to fix my house and keep me in shape. So I'm
Fantastic.
set, like parenting, awesome.
Done.
But, what do you see in young girls? Like, I think there was a book I read years and years ago, Reviving Ophelia. Like the whole
Mhm.
there's a point in a girl's life where we often see it just kind of the light goes out, right?
Mhm.
They're a certain way and then they hit puberty or they go to school and then it's like a dimming, right? And I look at my daughter who is extremely vibrant. All of her lights are on so bright that some of us are like, let me get my sunglasses. So, and I almost feel like I'm on the edge of my seat waiting for the dimming and like for the shoe to drop. And so what is your thought on that? And what do we do to support the light?
Yeah, well, right, because we never want that shoe to drop. We know that they need that light will make everything not easier, because life is going to be hard, but sort of like, the likelihood of success when they're adults, if they still have that chutzpah, we'll
Right.
call it, that sort of like, go get them attitude, will set them apart immeasurably. But you're right, it's something that does, early preteen to middle school to early high school, it starts to stop for a lot of them. We see girls speak less in class. We see girls opt out of playing competitive sports. Right, by middle school, girls are twice as likely as boys to stop playing a team sport because of social pressure, peer pressure, body image issues, things like that. And we know it's a great spot for them to learn to love their body, learn to be, healthy competitors, learn to be team oriented. Um, I think one way is to like think about the little moments in your girl's everyday life where you can reinforce the values of her speaking up and speaking out, the values of her putting herself forward, even if the outcome, maybe she loses the game or loses the election or loses the competition. I think for me, I was fortunate to have that early on, in part because I went to an all girls school. I went to the school I now run, which is crazy. That's another
Oh,
story
did you?
entirely.
Oh,
I
that's
did. I went
crazy.
to the Baldwin School, which I'm now ahead of. I went and but in between, I went and flew jets for the Navy and worked in the White House and traveled the
Right.
world, because that had been my dream that everyone had said I should go for, because it came from an environment, or I grew up in an environment where that was their focus, sort of encouraging that light, that go getter attitude. Um, but I do think we have to find little moments to reinforce it. The great example that came out during the research for my book was when, oh gosh, and it's one of the proudest moments that I have had as head of school, was when I mean, it came from a very unfortunate moment. So let's just start there. A shocking moment when two of our girls who, 16, 17 years old, juniors in high school, were sexually harassed on a campus near to ours, broad daylight, end of the afternoon of August, walking to the parking lot, and were by employees at this other school, were catcalled, called after, body shame, screams after them what they were going to do to them, what they thought of their bodies, like whole 9 yards. I mean, these are 16-year-old girls who, like,
Right.
in most instances, you're just, the whole thing's horrifying. So first, they got themselves out of there. They dashed to the parking lot as fast as they could, got into the waiting car driven by their mom because, if they couldn't parallel park yet, right? I know this is like the honest truth. But what they did next is what made me so proud. They sat there on their smartphones and wrote the president of this school, a middle-aged white man who they didn't know but just knew of because he's, a member, leading member of the community. And they reported exactly what happened, all the details, and then they concluded their message by saying, "I'm not sure if you have sexual harassment training for your employees, but if you do, you need a refresher. If you don't, please, we suggest you start now. We would welcome a chance to talk with you about it." Within
Wow.
36, right, within 36 hours, one of their parents hadn't even heard about the incident yet, and they were sitting in the office with the president of the school, the head of HR, the head of security, you know and sure enough, um, you know the employees were dealt with. There was, new sexual harassment training, sort of all the things you want. And we think about the fact that, like, in even a college environment, only 1 out of 4 moments of sexual harassment is reported. And here
Right.
we had teenage girls doing it. And when I asked the girls, like, how did you do that? Like, what gave you the to use your word, the light, the sort of like the go-getter, that sense of like, no, 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 I need to say something. And one of them said, yeah, it's just sort of what I've been taught to do over a lot of years. And she pointed to a moment when she was 10 and her dad used to make her call for pizza. And she said, well, I think the earliest moment I can remember it is when, like, I was a kid and my dad made me call for pizza. Not my brother, not my mom, but me. And I hated it. But every time we had a call for pizza or takeout, I had to do it. And she's like, I never really liked it. I never got used to it, but I got used to the act of speaking up, right? In a
Mm,
very age appropriate, safe way, right? We don't do it anymore because we have smartphones. But like, there are moments where you're out at a restaurant, who's ordering for the family? Is it your daughter? When you're
right.
going to a hotel and you have a question, who is speaking up and asking for something? These are all really safe ways. When middle school, who is asking the teacher for help, or getting an assignment, after the bad test, or talking to the coach about
Right.
how practice is going. Finding these small moments helps build the muscle memory that is required for you to speak up. And I
Yeah.
know that, like, it's tough throughout life, but like when we start young, it builds those moments, and that just again, the natural way of being, so that it gets easier over time.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love that so much. And when you brought up the takeout, so we have made our kids order at restaurants since they could talk, and to the chagrin of the waiters who are having to wait on a 3-year-old to tell them what but we have had them do that for the longest time. And we were out recently and my son was like mumbling. I remember he wouldn't like look at the waiter and he wouldn't speak up. And I was like, son, speak up, speak to the human who is
Hmm.
and he was like, oh my gosh, you're so embarrassing. But it's like moments like that, it's a life skill that I didn't have. I was always ordered for. But here's a question I have for you, and you can tell me if this is good parenting or bad, and I will not take offense either way. And I know it's not your job to tell parents what to do. I know that. And that's the disclaimer, right? But when kids have a problem at school, say it's with a teacher, say it's with a grade, say it's with a peer, I always encourage the kids to go straight to the teacher with their own words. Always. They hate me for it. Oh, they hate me for
Hmm.
it. And I will help them draft a message in Schoology or whatever. Like I will
Yeah.
help them draft because sometimes the drafts are funny. Like my son will be like, "Hey, Dr. So and so, I got a problem. I think you need to help." It's a little too so I kind of,
Hmm.
formalize it a
Yep.
little. But I really encourage them to go directly to the source. And I really don't like to get involved. And I don't
Oh,
know if that's the right thing or the wrong thing, so help.
well, I mean, again, with the big caveat of, you never know what's going on. And yet 100%, that should be the starting point as parents, right? Yes, there's always going to be moments where we need to step in, safety, sort of like those,
Sure.
it's something that sort of crosses the line entirely. But for those, the first place we should start is trying to coach our kids to do it themselves, right? I
Mm,
think, coaching from the sidelines is such a powerful way to help them practice the skills they'll need when they're older in a really safe environment, right? Because even if your kid had sent that, poorly crafted email to his teacher, the teacher's going to say, oh yeah, he's in, middle school still. Okay, right?
Right.
And then I didn't get your son's name, but he'll say,
James.
James,
Yeah.
here's the help. And by the way, next time you write a teacher, right? Like,
Don't
it's
say
not hey
yo.
you, yo, right? Right. But it's a perfect opportunity because those are the teachers, the coaches, the advisors. It's a safe environment. They want the best for your child. They want to make sure your child thrives. It's exactly the right place to practice it, because when they're out in the real world, I mean, forget the real world, even college, they're not going to
Right.
have the support system in place, or you know they it's not when you want them to turn to mom and dad to help navigate it. Certainly not on when they're navigating their first job interview and then out in the real world. So the time is to start young, to coach from the sidelines and do exactly what you're doing, help talk them through it, help them practice. That the student I mentioned who sort of had done such great things in high school, she also described how in middle school her dad used to, when she had a problem with a class, coach her, advise her what to do, and then drop her off at school and say, okay, let me know how it goes when you get home tonight, right? Like,
Right.
it's a great place to practice. Another trick or strategy I would say is a 24-hour rule, particularly with young girls. If in 24 hours the problem is still as dire as it seemed or it sounded when your daughter first mentioned it over dinner or on the car ride home, then maybe it's time to talk through getting involved as an adult. Typically within 24 hours, the worst things of the worst things become a little more manageable and a little more, okay, well, what can you do about it? Who can you talk to help? It's not as the urgency goes away. And and it either can be solved by your daughter, or
Right.
that's the starting point. So that's
Oh,
another way to think about it.
that's a really good way to think about it too. No, because my parents did everything for me. Like they spoke for me for a really long time. And by the time I got to college, you raise a good point. When I had to speak to these scary professors by myself, like I
Mhm.
did not understand the students that talk to these people.
Yeah.
That stayed after class to ask questions. I was like, why are you talking to the professors? What does that? And now I'm like, what a missed opportunity I was by not speaking up.
Well, and that's again when we break down this idea of we want our girls to be bold and courageous. That's the skill you need, right? One of the key skills is to effectively use your voice. And here I'll sort of share my moment. The like those moments of failure that we're all like embarrassed by, but as part of writing the book, I sort of came to the realization that, gosh, like I thought I was so bold and courageous and did all these crazy things, and yet as an adult, my goodness, if I like did not miss some opportunities because I hadn't practiced using my voice enough. And the pivotal one for me was the first time I was sitting at a table with the president of the United States when I was serving in the Obama administration, right? Like
No big
around it,
deal.
right? No big deal, right? Like had worked so hard to get to this like career moment across from the Oval Office, like with President Obama discussing Al Qaeda and foreign policy and national security, all the things I'd worked so hard on. And God, Meredith, if I didn't I am embarrassed to admit, I didn't say a word the entire meeting. Like the entire meeting, I sat there thinking, "Oh, no, no, I'll let that guy get it. Oh, my colleague has it. I'll answer the next question or make the next point." He only had an hour, so an hour later, we looked at us and I looked at each other and I was like, "Oh my God, how did I miss that chance?" I
Right.
had the good fortune of having other moments to sort of say my mind to the leader of the free world, so to speak. But on the other hand, I don't want any of our girls. I don't want Stella to ever like have her moment with, the president or whomever and
Right.
miss her opportunity.
Oh, that's such a yes. And I went through that phase and then I became a lawyer. I learned to talk and then
Mhm.
decided, here I do a podcast, right? So I grew out of it. But, I always think when I run into someone who's famous or it's an opportunity to speak to someone just for a moment. And I think I gotta go talk to him. Like Smokey Robinson was at the airport and he had his entourage and he obviously didn't want to be seen, but it was right as the pandemic was kind of picking up. It wasn't crowded. And I was like, okay, if we end up in line together at security, I'll talk to him. I'm not gonna chase him down. But he was like right next to me in security. We're just standing there with our bags. And I was like, I
Yeah.
think you're really great. And she's like, you do? And I was like, I do. And my daughter was there and she's like, who's that? I'm like, whoa. And he's like, do you want to have a picture? And he ended up being so nice, so chatty. And I thought that's just a great opportunity or a great example of I would have walked away from there and been like, well, I saw Smokey Robinson in the airport because he's like one of my dad's favorite singers. And
Oh, how
not that
wonderful.
you need to like chase celebrities down, but there's always these opportunities that if you just spoke up, maybe he'd have been a jerk and I'd be like, well, Smokey Robinson's a jerk. Did you know that? But he wasn't. And for the most part, people aren't. And I don't know. I try and approach my life with everything's a moment. Like you have a moment,
Yep.
and that is about using your voice. And so my daughter was there and she saw it, right? So she thinks her mother's crazy, of course, because she's 12.
Well, that's
But
yeah.
but how
Well, but
important
so
is
then,
it for us? Oh, go ahead.
no, it's incredibly important. I mean, you role model exactly what we're hoping that over time our girls learn. And so I think, first of all, our girls need us to be role models, not perfect. Like, this is
Right.
where being candid about the realities of life is actually, the most helpful thing we can do, and say, yes, this isn't easy. Yes, we struggle too, because they need to learn that failure is part of life, everyday failure, not like the massive failure, but those little moments where, we stumble, we don't talk in a meeting, we reply all to an email and it goes awry. Yeah. Um, yeah, but our girls need to hear that happens, because particularly young women tend to be perfectionists, tend to not want to take
Mm,
those chances, because what if it goes wrong? What if Smokey Robinson wasn't nice? Or what if you made,
right.
you said the wrong thing? I think the other thing that is incredibly helpful is to talk to her about that. I mean, I don't know if you've talked to her about that moment with Smokey Robinson, but just like in a very casual way, like, hey, that was cool, but I was a little nervous to talk to him because I don't know, he's Smokey Robinson.
But
And
she's so bold.
mm,
That's what I mean. Like like all she saw was me do that, and she would be like, well, of course we do that. Like that's kind of the human she is. But my son, on the other hand, would never. Like he would never. So it's interesting, the personality. So like my question to you about how do we keep the light from going out? Because like Stella will see that, and I probably need to tell her, sometimes you don't talk to people because she's the type that would just I probably need to dial it back with her, honestly. But no, I probably should tell her I was scared, but I don't want to instill fear if she's not doesn't have it, so
no.
I don't know.
Well, I mean, I guess this is where knowing your kids, right? Every kid is different. And so
Sure.
when we
Yeah.
have these generalizations about a lot of young girls, particularly, in early teen, start to become fearful of these moments. And maybe she hasn't gotten there yet, or maybe she never will. And so that conversation isn't necessary. It sounds like maybe for your son, it is just to say, hey, like, this was really cool. This is what it took. This is what I was worried about. Like,
Yeah.
I'm glad I tried it. Not a big deal. Like that casual, like, moment when they're half listening, or you think they're not listening, but they probably are and taking it anyway, right?
Yeah.
Just to reinforce the value of trying, the value of like making your voice heard, speaking up, and like going for it, I think is, more impactful than we realize with our kids.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you decided to write your book, what was
Mhm.
burning in you? Like what was your message that you said, I have got, because I know anyone that writes a book has something to say. No one goes through this process just for giggles.
Yeah,
So
yes,
what
that's
is
true.
it that what is it you had to really say and you want to make sure that people get out of the book?
Yeah, well, so when I do a leadership class for the girls at my school, right before they go off to college, and sort of, we talk about big ideas, but also like the practical realities of the real world. And they kept pushing me to tell my stories, and then to explain, not to get ready for college, but like, what do they need in the real world? Like, what are those things that they're gonna wish they had that no one ever talked to them about? And we're talking about negotiating. We're talking about, how to like keep that competitive spirit alive, that fire, in a way that like that works in a co-ed environment, particularly because I run an all-girls school. We talked about, how to be adaptable, like what that looks like, when you're navigating, life as a working mother for those of us them who choose to have children. And this was sort of shortly after I'd become a mother, so they were curious and they didn't want to ask, but I could tell they wanted to hear it. And I just realized that these are the stories that I wish I could be telling to more girls than just those I have at my school. And so, the book is an effort to do that, to share stories that I, learned through trial and error, and, the real world out there, and then pair it with research and lessons from fellow female leaders across, the Hollywood, the Pentagon, the military, corporate world, and elsewhere, to say, all right, what are the lessons we wish we had when we were young, or that we are still working on as adults, that we can help everyone learn, now, because the working world is still tough for women, I have to say, right? The real world is still tough for women. It's just a reality. And And, it's unfortunate, but true for at least the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I feel like I could talk to you forever. You have a fascinating background. Like we didn't even touch on like all the things you've done up until this point, but maybe we can have you back for a part
I would
two
love that.
and talk about, flying planes and President Obama and all that stuff. But tell me where everyone can follow you and get your book.
Awesome. So the book is available on Amazon, or wherever you pick up your books. Indie bookstores too these days, for those who can get there. Whatgirlsneed.com. What Girls Need: How to Raise Bold, Courageous, and Resilient Women. And my website, whatgirlsneed.com, has all my contact info plus resources for parents, educators, and female leaders, so that we can all help each other be our best selves.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Marisa.
Thank you, Meredith. It was great to be here.
Hi, and welcome to the Same 24 Hours podcast. I'm Meredith Atwood, author of the book, The Year of No Nonsense. I'm a former attorney turned writer, speaker, and Ironman triathlete. Although right now, all I really like to do is lift weights. We all have the same 24 hours, but it's what we do in those hours that leads to our greatest health, happiness, and success. It's my goal to crack the code on a life of less nonsense, so we can all make the most of our 24 hours. So let's get started.